Welcome back for Hunter x Hunter Chapter 418 Talk. This week we're switching to Tserriednich's point of view for the first time since way back in 387. Well, I say way back because that chapter came out 8 years ago, but in the story only 4 days have actually passed since then. It's just been a really eventful 4 days. And fortunately for the 4th Prince, he's been spending that time practicing Zetsu and figuring out his confusing Nen ability, in preparation for something kinda like this to happen. You better make this one count, Sari, cause faking your own death is the kind of trick people start catching on to after the first time. So, there's no putting it off, we have to talk about how his ability works. My hypothesis from the previous chapter video was mostly wrong. I did call that after opening his eyes, Tserriednich can leave Zetsu early to break the illusion spell, and that's how he was able to chat with Salkov. But what I didn't guess was that, by the same token, he can stay in Zetsu after opening his eyes for longer than 10 seconds. For as long as he wants, in fact, and the illusion spell will just keep going. It was only a coincidence that it seemed like it was limited to 10 seconds in chapter 387, because Melody's song interrupted his Zetsu at that point, so this diagram wound up a little misleading. That means there never was any tricky puzzle to solve about how Sari gets out of this tight spot with only 10 or even 30 seconds of illusion time. He's got hours to play with, easy peasy. But the magic trick isn't finished quite yet, because the illusion antenna does have a limited range, and Tserriednich wants to get himself out of room 1004. To avoid giving himself away, his plan is to wear this stylish disguise, undo his Zetsu, and then play the role of a mysterious intruder who then escapes, leaving behind a coffin loaded with his body weight in guns. This gets him out of the room, and on his merry way, without anyone squawking to Ben that he's actually still alive. A few important things to consider about this plan. 1. Anyone who picks up that coffin and tries to move it is going to notice pretty quick that there's guns rattling around inside. Sari must understand how noisy that would be, and so maybe the point here wasn't to make the coffin feel full, it was to keep a big stash of guns in the room after the royal army takes away their other weapons. In which case, sure, good move. The body's not supposed to be moved until tomorrow anyway, so it's probably fine. We've got a long day ahead of us before we have to think about Friday morning. 2. No one has any reason to attack 1004 right now, and so this mysterious intruder thing is gonna look fishy as hell. But I have a suggestion. Tserriednich could disguise his voice and yell something about the Haley or Morena, and as far as these Royal Army guys are concerned, that would explain a senseless attack that comes out of nowhere. In fact, with the unseen intruder seemingly popping into existence, it would look a lot like Luini's attacks, which the Royal Army knows about, though they don't know he's already dead. Tserriednich is aware of the Haley situation, of course, so the idea to use them as cover might occur to him. And conveniently, that imposture would have sort of a built-in way of resolving consideration number 3. Namely the issue of smell. Tserriednich's illusory body is out of sight, secure in the coffin, and presumably somebody mopped the floor, so disappearing bloodstains won't give him away. But Salkov tells us very conspicuously that he smells his prince's blood and guts, and when Sari cancels his Zetsu, that illusory stench of gore will be cancelled with it. There's only one thing to do to avoid giving the game away, and that is to supply enough new blood and guts that nobody notices anything missing. He's gonna have to shoot his way out and make a big bloody mess, which is just what a Haley member would do, so you see how synergistic my suggestions are. There's a bunch of royal guards watching the doors, but Tserriednich's a talented guy who likes to play with guns, and we already know he can activate his ability consecutively. So I'm thinking this is about to look like the hallway scene at the end of Equilibrium 2002. That's my idea for how Sari might affect his escape, but at this point I feel like I should rewind a little and try to clarify the mechanics of this illusion spell, within the limits of my own understanding. We know he can't do anything to harm or mess with other people while maintaining his illusion, and if he interferes with them in some way, they just don't notice, and see a version of reality where he didn't interfere instead. That's case 1, other people, no interaction allowed. Then there's all the rifles he stuffed in the coffin. Case 2, rifles, interaction allowed, but nobody sees it. Presumably everyone still sees those rifles in the pile that Tserriednich took them from. They don't see rifles floating on their own into the coffin. So inanimate objects that nobody is carrying he can move around without anyone noticing. Now case 3, the will. Interaction allowed, and Salkov notices what's been changed. It's not a blank page that reverts to writing when Zetsu gets cancelled, cause Zetsu hasn't been cancelled yet. So just looking at it naively, don't cases 2 and 3 seem to contradict each other? I answer that the illusion antenna is manipulating people's minds to make it so they can't perceive a living Tserriednich or anything else that would contradict their memory of the vision they saw. So ultimately, that antenna decides what's worth a mind wipe and what isn't. Tserri carrying a bunch of guns contradicts the death that they've all been shown, so that gets scrubbed completely. But Salkov finding a will in Tserriednich's desk doesn't contradict the vision he's been shown up to that point, because he naturally assumes it was written before Tserri died. Therefore, the antenna doesn't have to manipulate him into seeing a blank page. But if Tserri had written something in the will that proved incontrovertibly that the vision was fake, and he was still alive, I hypothesized that the antenna would censor that, and in that case Salkov would see a blank page. The rule, as I understand it, is to censor any contradiction or dissonance with the projected reality the antenna is currently generating. It's not a policy of blanket censorship on everything Tserriednich does, which I have to think would be a lot simpler. But hey, we have an example here with the will of how a more selective censorship policy can be beneficial. I won't question the antenna, clearly it knows best how to do its job. To speculate on mechanics a little further, let's spotlight this bit about how Tserriednich can't influence the speech or actions of his vision self, no matter how hard he thinks about what he plans to say or do before closing his eyes. This makes me think the vision self might not be based on Tserriednich directly at all. Clearly the antenna isn't scanning his mind and delivering an up-to-date simulation of what Tserriednich is about to do, cause then this should be working. So what is the antenna doing instead? Where does this fake CCTV future come from? Well, we know it's performing manipulation on Tserriednich's audience and constructing a scene based on what they're all about to do. So I posit that it's also simulating a Tserriednich based on the expectations of this audience. After all, the simplest way to make the vision believable to the audience being manipulated is to show them what they already expect to see. If this really is how the vision gets generated, it might be interesting to see the fake Tserriednich act out of character if his audience doesn't know him well. They might even betray details about how they see Tserri that the real Tserri would find very interesting. This would also suggest that, since the vision is dependent upon scanning other people's minds, the ability simply wouldn't work if there were no other people in range. Not that that's likely to be an issue, the black whale is pretty cramped, but a potential downside nonetheless. Now let's talk about batteries. To do all of this area of effect manipulation, mind reading to match expectations, and then censoring specific perceptions to maintain the fake vision's integrity, the antenna is naturally burning through a lot of aura. Hence Tserriednich's intuition of an 11:1 charge-up time to ability usage ratio. Let's assume that intuition is spot on, and use it to crunch some numbers. Tserriednich believes he's got 3 hours and 48 minutes of illusion time left, or 3.8 hours. Those would have taken 41.8 hours to charge up, since that's 3.8 times 11. And supposing the charging began when he discovered his ability, we can use that to calculate how much practice he's done with his illusion antenna since Sunday night. The Sunday banquet started at 8 PM, and as it kicks off, here we see Melody thinking she's got 90 minutes before the twins' escape attempt. Looking at the program, that makes sense. You don't want these things dragging on all night. So the song that interrupted Tserriednich's first use of his illusion antenna was played at about 9:30 PM on Sunday. The time right now is just after 2:15 PM on Thursday, because special martial law just kicked off. So that's 4 days minus 7 hours 15 minutes, or 96 hours minus 7.25 hours. That makes 88.75 hours. Now I think we should deduct time for sleep, because we know Nen beasts drain your aura, and then you recharge your own batteries by sleeping. That's why Mimosa got so sleepy. Since that's the system, it doesn't really make sense for a beast to keep draining while you're asleep. So let's knock off 4 nights of rest at 8 hours each, a total of 32. And that leaves 56.75 hours that Tserriednich could have spent banking aura. Still with me? So he spent 41.8 hours banking what he's got now, and that's out of a possible 56.75 charging hours. so there's 14.95 missing hours to account for. Naively, we could just divide this by 11 and say he spends 1.36 hours using his illusion antenna, but that's wrong, because the time spent using the ability is time he wasn't spending charging it up. Instead, we should write it like this. The missing 14.95 hours are the sum of illusion time times 11 and missing potential charge time. Of course, time spent doing the illusion and missing charge time are going to be the same. So the sum is just 11x plus x equals 12x. Then solve for x, and we get just under 1.25 hours, or roughly an hour and 15 minutes. And that's how much time Tserriednich has spent experimenting with the illusion antenna so far. I know there's at least one of you watching this who would have done this calculation if I hadn't done it here for you, so you're welcome. It was worth it to save you the trouble. But looking at this figure, it seems to me he's done a whole lot of experiments with his illusions, because we get to see such an experiment with the water bottle, and it's only a few seconds long. I think it's fair to wonder, how has he done maybe 100 or more of these without ever testing his hypothesis about the antenna's range? Or his hypothesis about an outside observer being unaffected? He could learn the exact limits of the range by trial and error, and not have to rely on a vague sense that the static is getting louder, so he's probably nearing the edge of it. And then he could use that knowledge to position someone just outside the range and figure out what they're able to see. Maybe he just doesn't want to leave his room for any reason, but nailing these details down would be a pretty compelling reason. My answer to all this is Tserriednich would rather not fully understand his ability yet than risk giving anything away even to his own personal guards. This ability staying secret is paramount for it to remain fully effective, so limit testing the antenna range and maybe appearing to teleport if he goes outside of it is an unacceptable risk. This shows how extremely highly he values the secret, because it's also very important that he learn how his ability works as soon as possible, and yet he's prioritized secrecy even higher. He's that careful. With that in mind, just how crazy is Tserriednich about Theta, right? I mean, she has a lot of information to help her deduce Tserriednich's ability, and he knows it. Specifically, she knows he can appear to die without actually dying, and he is currently betting his life on his faked death remaining undiscovered. Yet it does not occur to Tserri anywhere in this chapter to tie up that loose end by murdering Theta. Instead, he's thinking about her intentions, he's totally freaking out when she glances in his direction, he's taking a perverse thrill in talking to her when she can't hear him, because it's like she's ignoring him. He's so infatuated with Theta, it's almost sweet. But because this is Tserriednich, I find this 10 times spookier than if he were just coldly planning her death. Theta is wonderful, I would love another Theta point of view, and she definitely doesn't deserve whatever all of this is leading up to. Finally, we should turn our attention to where Tserriednich is going after his escape from 1004. In the short term, we know he wants to leave Tier 1 via Route A, which is reserved for royalty. But after that, what's his destination gonna be? Well, according to Momoli, Tserriednich should want to pay Morena a visit and have a little chat about the Haley going rogue. But now that he's a Nen user, he can probably guess that all the killing done by Morena's family is connected to Nen, and so he'd be walking into a big crowd of hostile Nen users, not the smartest idea. Instead, he might try to make contact with Odashin and the rest of his old gang for any info they've managed to gather on Morena's hideout. He did tell them to locate the hideout, although they've been doing their best not to find it up to this point. And just as a momentary tangent, we learned this chapter that the Justice Bureau actually stretches between Tiers 2 and 3, which is interesting. You know what else is between Tiers 2 and 3? Morena's hideout. My old theory about Kaiser helping Morena is looking pretty good to me right now. Go check that one out if you haven't yet. Might be relevant pretty soon. Anyway, those were two options, right? Go straight to Morena or hook up with his old pals in the army. I guess he could also just hide in some corner on the lower tiers and wait for SML to end, but that's way too boring for Tserriednich to consider. Who else does Tserri know or care about? Well, we know he's supposed to be tight with Hulkenberg, but as far as he's been informed, Hulkenberg is dead. However, I suspect Hulkenberg is controlling Luzurus' body right now, and that he's heading for the lower tiers via Route A, possibly with Unma's assistance. These two could easily bump into each other without having any idea that they've done so, since Hulkenberg looks like Luzurus, and Tserriednich looks like the Invisible Man. Depending on how that encounter goes, it's even possible that they'll see through each other's disguises and have a happy reunion, in which case Tserriednich could get looped into the Hulkenberg story for a while. They both plan to win the war, but Ben is planning to kill them both today, so they'd have a pretty good reason for a temporary alliance, even if they didn't get along well, which again, supposedly they do. These options are not mutually exclusive, so Tserriednich's Stroll could take him through an encounter with Lusenberg, and then a chat with the Odishin gang, and then he might decide to go and scope out Morena's hideout. Depending on the timing, he might even bump into Borkson on her way out. I'm sure there's a lot he'd like to ask her about Morena, and she's absolutely loaded with info after the card game. Plus, you know what? Borkson is also friends with Theta. Maybe he could ask Bork whether he's Theta's type, get some tips on how to approach her, you know? Find out what type of flowers to buy. I'm sure Sari would find it a very helpful and enlightening conversation, and I'm sure Borkson would be forthcoming in the answers she gave. She wouldn't think of lying to him, would she? And on that ominous note, I'll wrap it up here for this week. If you didn't see it because it wasn't posted at my regular time, I have a Benjamin analysis video that I worked on slowly yet surely during the break, so be sure to check that out. If you have a complicated hypothetical question about how Tserriednich's ability works that I have no way of answering, please leave it in the comments below. Viewer engagement with my videos is what charges up my illusion battery, along with my generous patrons. So thank you to them, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.